Let me introduce our first speaker. For San Francisco, Lowell Chu is the Energy Program Manager at the San Francisco Department of the Environment. Lowell has focused on energy efficiency projects and program implementation at San Francisco Environment. So I'm going to ask Lowell to unmute himself and share his screen with us. Thanks.
Elena, thank you everyone for joining us and for listening to our plan to accelerate and advance transportation electrification, not just electric vehicle, but also e-bikes and other sustainable modes of transportation. As you know, transit first has been a policy of the city and county of San Francisco since the 70s. And to that end, just as a preamble to the presentation, we have woven this policy into our overall e-mobility plan. So you're going to be able to see that, yes, we have a focus on personal vehicles, but public transit and inclusive of walking, biking, all that is also a part of our plan. Next slide, please, Elena. And we were just about to go into how Mayor Breed has committed San Francisco to be a net zero emissions city by 2050. And that's a very ambitious goal. And given that, next slide, please. Given the ambitiousness and the urgency of the goal, we have always been, the Department of the Environment has always been trying to narrow down the focus of the emission sources, right? So, in the department, we have three numbers that represent what it is that we do: 0, 80, 100, right? So 0 is zero waste, zero toxics. 80 speaks to the percentage of sustainable trips that we would like to see in San Francisco. So 80% of intercity trips should be taken in a sustainable manner. So that's biking, walking, public transit, EV by 2030. 100 is 100% renewable energy, also by 2030. And then you see there's some roots there that just that's carbon sequestration, that's putting carbon back into the earth. So the Department of the Environment is supporting the net zero emissions commitment with 0, 80, 100, and then roots. Next slide, please. And San Francisco has really demonstrated its ability to reduce emissions while elevating the economy, also supporting the growth in population. This slide, the significance of this slide shows that, since in 2017, I'm sure it's changed some by now, the population has increased 22%. The economy has expanded 166, but we're able to reduce emissions by 36%. So this slide, again, it shows that San Francisco is able to balance the needs of the population, advance growth in the economy while reducing emissions. Next slide, please. And so I think the importance of this slide here is that in 2017 and similar in 2018, half of the city's emission comes from the transportation sector. And within that transportation sector, nearly 3/4 of it comes from mobile sources. That's private vehicles, trucks. So it is really important that we look at transportation and reducing the amount of emission from that sector in order to meet our 2050 commitment. Next slide, please. Well, if there was a photo here, it would have showed. Let's see what it would have showed. It would have showed what I was just talking about. Like, nearly 3/4 of the emissions from the transportation sector is from private cars and trucks. Next slide, please.
Sorry about that.
That's okay, no. So, as I mentioned, Transit First is the foundation of the city's transportation policy, right? So we want folks to use our really thoughtful, carefully planned, and very well-supported public transit infrastructure. And our transportation our public transportation system is it's world class. It's something that we're very proud of. But and you know, it also speaks to our investments. Public investments have gone to expanding, sustaining, and improving public transit. Next slide, please. However, for those that have to drive, and there are those that do, and there are instances where a private vehicle makes more sense versus other modes, that that vehicle needs to be electric. And to that end, we have made significant progress in building the roadmap to 100% electrification, transportation electrification by 2040. Next slide, please. In there are just like you know in looking at transportation electrification, there are just so many benefits beyond just emission beyond just reducing emissions. It also speaks to equity, because if you look at the disadvantaged communities around San Francisco, they're all clustered around the major freeways and thoroughfares of the city. So all along US 80, 101, parts of 280 and Southeast Corner. So when we're cleaning up the air, we're doing more than just reducing emissions. We are also uplifting communities that have been adversely impacted by the pollution, and we're also ensuring that San Francisco becomes a more livable city for everyone. Next slide, please. So this is just what I was referring to, and the areas in red has it's basically it's where the freeways are, and we see that transportation related air pollution, such as particulate matter, is that they are disproportionately a health burden on our most vulnerable residents. And again, this map is significant because it shows that air pollutants are congregating along the major transportation corridors that run through many of San Francisco's lower income communities. Next slide, please. So what do we do about it? San Francisco in 2017 basically convened under Mayor Lee's leadership, convened the citywide electric vehicle working group, which consisted of department heads of the entire city family. And from the working group, they were able to craft some policies. They were also able to convene a subcommittee that developed the electric vehicle roadmap. And this roadmap basically has 3 targets. So by 2025, 50% of all new vehicles registered in San Francisco must be electric. By 2030, 100%, right? So that's 5 years in advance of Governor Newsom's executive order from Wednesday. And by 2040, all vehicles should be electric, even passing through, just originating from, ending in San Francisco. All vehicles should be electric by 2040. And I wanted to underscore the stakeholder process that we deployed to develop the EV roadmap. The subcommittee consisted of not only department heads, but also stakeholders. And I think, Elena, your group was part of our stakeholder engagement process. And, we had OEMs participating. We had charging providers also participate. We have community-based organizations. So it was a very broad group of stakeholders that developed the EV roadmap. Next slide, please.
Sorry.
So the roadmap has 6 pretty general strategies, and I'm happy to go into more details around each of them at a different time. But basically, we want to raise public awareness around the benefits of electric vehicle. And we also want to raise public awareness within our own city family. So, we are thinking about developing a EV ombudsperson that's going to be the city's clearinghouse for all things EV related. And that person is also going to raise awareness within the city family, in permitting department, in the planning department, in the public works department. that person is going to try to facilitate a system where charging infrastructure projects are permitted expediently, and in doing so, that would reduce the soft costs, the upfront engineering costs, and also the lead time for large charging projects. The next strategy is incentives. Sure, monetary incentives are helpful, but with this particular strategy, San Francisco is also contemplating policy strategies and other ways to incent electric vehicle over conventional gas or diesel vehicles. The next piece is probably the most important piece in our strategy, the most active piece, I would say, is to build charging infrastructure. And that's because 2/3 of our residents live in multifamily, and many of those do not have home charging. And it's important that we are able to, in San Francisco, build a charging infrastructure to support those that do not have home charging through fast, accessible, ubiquitous, affordable public charging. And so to that end, the team is working on expanding charging infrastructure in the form of potentially charging plazas in San Francisco to help make the fuel parity, right? So, we talk about cost parity, but fueling parity is also important, where the EV driver can have the same security as a full tank of gas. The next is electrical grid. So, the charging infrastructure and electrical grid strategy go hand in hand. We want a stable, reliable grid, and we also want to influence and direct investments into supporting the regulatory requirements that utilities have for improving electric grid infrastructure to support transportation electrification. The second to last strategy is a focus on medium heavy duty vehicles in San Francisco. That speaks particularly to the last mile delivery. And then finally, we have emerging mobility, and that's more along the lines of e-bikes and autonomous vehicle. Next slide, please.
Okay, well, we need to wrap it up in about another minute.
Okay, we're almost done, getting close. So this slide is just basically showing how San Francisco is compared to others. We're number 2. Next slide, please. And this slide just kind of show where the maps by supervisor districts are, and just the concentration of different types of charging stations. Next slide, please. I spoke about how the challenge of San Francisco, we're in a dense city, and that, next slide, please. Currently, we have 820 publicly accessible charging points. Next slide. And they are spread around the city, mostly concentrated in the urban core, where areas where there's single family homes. Those are more conducive to home charging. Next slide, please. We spoke about also that the stakeholder engagement process. So here are some of the partners, Good Alternatives, City College, and Workforce Development. Next slide, please. And the slide just talks about what the barriers are. So I think that charging infrastructure basically is huge. From a recently published ICCT report, that San Francisco really needs about 563 fast chargers in order to meet a 2030 objective. Right now we're 39, and we're on pace for 3 new chargers a year if nothing changes. So that's huge. So next slide, please, Elena. These are some of the barriers. The curb space is very valuable. Transformers, where they go, is also contentious. There's grid limitations. Costs are high, but we're working on that. Navigating incentives can be tricky. And there are some restrictions on repaving roads that have been recently done. Next slide, please. And again, this final slide, it's about partnership. So the whole city family is behind this, and that is very much a collaborative effort. Beyond a city family, we are working with other stakeholders to develop public-private partnerships. And so, next slide, please. And that's the end. Just in time, I think.
Yeah, very good. Thank you so much, Lowell.
Thank you.
So our next speaker will be for the City of Berkeley. Sarah Moore is the Sustainability Program Manager in the City of Berkeley's Office of Energy and Sustainable Development. Sarah.
Thank you, Elena, and thank you, Lowell. San Francisco has definitely always been a city that we look to and are thrilled to partner with. So let me see if I can successfully share my screen here. So Berkeley was one of the first cities in the nation to adopt a climate action plan, and that was back in 2009. And with the support of the community and our elected officials, Berkeley's continued to set ambitious climate goals. In 2018, Berkeley City Council declared a climate emergency and the goal of becoming a fossil fuel-free city as soon as possible. And looking at our most recent greenhouse gas emissions inventory, this is from 2018, makes it quickly obvious why the work we're discussing today is so important to our community. Transportation is responsible for 59% of our community's total greenhouse gas emissions. So carbon neutrality cannot be achieved without electric mobility. I am very pleased to share that our first comprehensive assessment and roadmap for electric mobility in Berkeley was approved by Berkeley City Council on July 21st of this year. This roadmap looks at the movement of people and alternatives to driving, such as walking, biking, and public transit, as well as all types of electric mobility, including shared, ride-hailing, and privately owned resources, micromobility, such as electric bikes, also called e-bikes, and scooters, motorcycles, mopeds, and cars. And this work stemmed from several council actions in the spring of 2018, a referral to create an EV action plan, the fossil fuel-free city referral, and also the extension of a residential curbside EV charging pilot, with a recognition that additional efforts were needed to support increased adoption of electric mobility in Berkeley, particularly to ensure equitable access to the benefits of clean transportation. And we were fortunate to get a lot of public input in this creation and refinement of the roadmap. The Electric Mobility Roadmap developed over a 15-month period between the fall of 2018 and the spring of 2020 with community partners, Berkeley's commissions, and public input, early engagement of community-based organizations and nonprofits really helped us identify mobility gaps, particularly for low-income residents, renters, communities of color, people with disabilities, and other priority stakeholders. I really want to stress that community partners were critical in the development of the roadmap and its equity-focused approach, and that those partnerships are going to be essential to its implementation. Going into this project, we were aware of some of the barriers to electric mobility, including a lack of awareness about options, benefits, and incentives related to electric mobility, as well as obstacles to EV charging access. But outreach for the roadmap really highlighted other barriers, such as physical and safety barriers to accessing certain transportation options. And these could be based on age, both for our senior population as well as our very young and families with young children, disabilities, also issues based on gaps in safe infrastructure, like sidewalk condition and bike lanes. We also learned more about technological barriers. So many of their shared mobility options, including car sharing, ride hailing, scooters, shared bikes, really rely on smartphones and internet service, home internet service, and these aren't available to all residents. So these barriers and the other data collected during the roadmap process informed our vision. The roadmap vision, created through this stakeholder engagement, is to create a fossil fuel-free transportation system that integrates with and supports the city's ongoing efforts to increase walking, biking, and public transportation use in Berkeley, and that ensures equitable access to the benefits of clean transportation. In addition to the goals, strategies, and actions, and I'm going to get into those a little more in a minute, the roadmap features analyses and maps which prioritize geographic areas for equitable electric mobility investment, public and workplace charging, and residential charging. And these maps can both help guide our internal planning and investment, as well as provide guidance for external opportunities and partnerships, such as future opportunities through our CCA, East Bay Community Energy, and opportunities like Electrify America. The map that I'm showing here is one that was created titled Priority Areas for Equitable Electric Mobility Investment. And it's looking specifically at where residents have less access to transportation options, so where vehicle ownership and public transportation access are lower, who are more likely to live in affordable and or multifamily housing, and are more highly impacted by pollution, poverty, and other socioeconomic vulnerabilities. So the darker areas indicate greater need.
Pardon me, Sarah. I don't think we're seeing your pointer. If other people are, you can speak up, but you were pointing at something just then. Is that true?
Oh, no, I was just trying to give a little more detail about what that map shows.
Okay, sorry about that. Thank
No
you.
worries. No, glad you're listening. I appreciate it. So these are the 4 goals of our roadmap. In addition to these goals, we also have 23 strategies and 58 actions to help achieve the vision. And these focus on activities within the next 5 to 10 years. The primary goal, of course, is that top one, ensuring equity and access to electric mobility. So the strategies and actions within that first goal of ensuring equity and access to electric mobility include items that increase access to mobility, reduce air pollution, and increase economic opportunity. Example strategies include community-driven equity projects like electric car sharing, bike sharing, or e-bike incentive pilots, and pilots that address physical barriers to electric mobility for disabled and or elderly residents. Equitable workforce and business strategies include collaborating with EV workforce stakeholders to develop and promote training opportunities, particularly high road strategies, which support entry of people with barriers to employment to jobs that offer good wages, benefits, and career pathways. Under the goal of improving alternatives to driving, we are working to increase non-automobile mode share and increase access to electric mobility options. Safety and access are key. And strategies and actions within this goal include things like supporting bus electrification and working to develop electric shared mobility hubs, which ideally would provide multiple services, such as fast charging for ride-hailing drivers and those who rent, as well as charging for electric bicycles and wheelchairs and Wi-Fi access. Achieving zero net carbon emissions will require dramatic increases in the adoption of electric vehicles and charging stations, as Lowell mentioned as well. So as of 2017, Berkeley had the 7th highest electric vehicle sales share of California cities, with electric vehicles making up 16% of newly registered vehicles and about 3%, a little over actually, 3% of total vehicles in Berkeley. So that's great, we've been successful. And our analysis for this roadmap estimates that EV adoption in Berkeley needs to increase to 25% of registered vehicles in 2025, 55% in 2035, and 100% by 2045 to reach carbon neutrality. Public and workplace charging must also increase dramatically. The City of Berkeley has made some recent strides on some of the strategies under this goal. For instance, we adopted a local amendment to the state's Green Building Code to require substantial increases in the quantity of EV-ready parking spaces in newly constructed buildings. And new non-residential buildings are now required to install EV charging at 10% of spaces when they are built. We've also increased public charging on municipal property. This photo is of our city-owned downtown parking garage, the Center Street Garage, and that garage now includes 57 level 2 charging ports for public and fleet use. And similarly, thanks to our CCA, East Bay Community Energy, Berkeley recently completed a plan for transitioning the municipal fleet to electric vehicles by 2030 as one of the strategies within the final roadmap goal of demonstrating city leadership. Other strategies under this goal include improving electric mobility charging management, better integrating electric charging into streetscape and construction projects, and utilizing local businesses and innovation networks to support electric mobility. Finally, given our timing, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows that there are more opportunities to learn about the many benefits of electric cars and e-bikes at a series of online workshops beginning tomorrow, which highlight the benefits of zero-emission transportation. So the Bay Area workshop offerings as part of National Drive Electric Week kick off tomorrow with Electrify Your Ride, which is an opportunity to hear from electric vehicle owners about their experiences, see models of electric cars and e-bikes, and preview not yet released vehicles. On Wednesday, my wonderful coworker, Rebecca Milliken, along with our moderator, Elena, will be sharing Electric Cars 101, and that's going to cover home and public charging, rebates and incentives, and special programs for income qualified drivers. And the Spanish language workshop on Sunday, October 4th, highlights financial assistance programs that put vehicle ownership within reach for more families. This event, of course, would usually be in person, right? For the last 3 years, the City of Berkeley has worked with the Ecology Center and other partners to host a Ride Electric at the Farmers Market event in September. And since the development of the roadmap, local and global transportation have been altered dramatically due to the coronavirus pandemic and the social distancing, shelter-in-place techniques that have been employed in response. So we've all had to be flexible and creative, right? That's why this is a virtual event this year. And realistically, there have been delays and budget impacts. In light of COVID, we removed an initial recommendation along with our roadmap adoption for a new staff position within Public Works focused on advancing and accelerating electric mobility strategies in Berkeley. And that's going to be revisited in time. But for now, we're working to form an electric mobility implementation working group, including community stakeholders, to prioritize, support, and track implementation of the actions of this plan, including identifying funding sources for implementation. Because of course, implementation of the roadmap is going to be even more critical as coronavirus is better controlled and restrictions on movements are eased. Support is needed to maintain momentum for positive travel behaviors like walking, biking, and telecommuting, and rebuilding trust in public transit and shared vehicles. And of course, increasing adoptions of electric powered vehicles is critical. Everyone needs to share in the benefits of clean transportation. And that is it for me. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. That was really good, and I especially love the plug to our EV 101s, I have to say. But, all right, and our next presenter from San Anselmo is Elise Simonian, who has served as the planning director for the town of San Anselmo since 2015 and is a staff member for the San Anselmo Sustainability Commission.
Good morning. You could hear me and see my screen, hopefully on full screen. Great. Okay, good. I'm the planning director for the town of San Anselmo. And see if my screen will move. The town is a small town with about 13,000 residents in Marin County, which is just west of San Rafael, and we have a small planning department. And although we have just 377 electric vehicles in 2018, we are doing well compared to the other jurisdictions that are in this panel, and we're also approaching Berkeley at 2.9%. I couldn't get more recent data because it's difficult now because you need to use zip codes to pull the data. The town's been doing really well with its climate action plan goals, but our success has been really due to a lot of the state environmental laws and not due to particular actions of individual San Anselmo residents. And we have a long way to go to get to our 2050 goal to be 80% below 2005 emission levels. And I'm sorry, but I just moved something on my screen and now I can't see let's see if I can, oh, there we go. I can see my button. You're going to see a lot of pie charts like this today. Transportation produces the largest measurable percent of greenhouse gas emissions in San Anselmo, also at 55%. And in addition, the town government vehicles and town government employee commuting make up about 26% of the greenhouse gases that are generated by town government operations. San Anselmo adopted our EV strategy in February of 2019, and we were the first Marin County jurisdiction to adopt an EV strategy. It was prepared in-house by staff and is just a short 11-page document. We reviewed and took goals and ideas from other plans. We started by looking at Sacramento, and then also found a lot of great information from Santa Clara's net zero documents, and a lot of our goals were also taken from or inspired by the City of San Rafael's Climate Action Plan, which was being drafted at the time. We had a public process for adoption of our plan, which included a number of meetings in front of our Sustainability Commission. The town does have a Sustainability Commission of 5 members and currently 2 youth members as well. And then because we were bringing it forward with a general plan amendment for EV readiness, it also went to our Planning Commission before finally being heard by our town council at 2 public hearings. And then right after adoption, our Sustainability Commission sent out a press release because one of their goals really has been to try to lead in climate change or climate action, and to inspire other communities to do the same. So we wanted to get the word out that we had done this in order to hopefully encourage others to do it as well. The Sustainability Commission also lobbied to the town council to dedicate funds for programs in the plan. And the first year, the town did allocate $60,000 towards electric vehicle, hopefully towards matching grants for electric vehicle charging stations and other improvements and vehicles. We had hoped to get another $50,000 per year towards replacement of vehicles, but that just hasn't happened to the budget constraints now. And then our climate action plan actually followed our electric vehicle strategy, but it worked out really well that way because then the entire electric vehicle strategy has been folded into our climate action plan. And then after all that, then the town declared a climate emergency. So we were a little behind in the climate emergency declaration, but the town did make that declaration in 2020. We have a really old general plan that dates back to the 70s and 80s, and so there's no mention of sustainability in the plan, and certainly not electric vehicles. So the town amended the general plan to include a goal to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and amended the circulation element to incorporate goals for zero emission vehicle readiness. And we knew that including EV readiness in the general plan would really set the stage for taking more actions to promote electric vehicles, like building and zoning codes, and then also budget allocations. And the general plan really does provide a foundation for the electric vehicle strategy and should help facilitate improvements in the future, as our capital improvement program must be consistent with the general plan. The main rules for town government in our plan are to have a municipal EV fleet and to promote electric vehicles and to install charging infrastructure. And then the main goals in the whole EV strategy are really to advance public charging infrastructure for future EV demand. And we want to make it really easy and less expensive to install chargers in the town. We hope to have these chargers in places where people live and congregate, and where they can serve the multifamily properties who may not have electric chargers available. But we do have many single family residents installing chargers for their own homes. We also really wanted to actively promote electric vehicles as a preferred transportation option and increase their number, with a goal of 3,000 zero emission vehicles by 2030. And this would represent approximately 23% of all vehicles in San Anselmo. And the goal is estimated to reduce our total annual emissions by about 10%. San Anselmo's replaced all of its government passenger vehicles with EVs, which is 16% of our vehicle fleet. And that might sound like a lot, but really we have 3 electric vehicles. And that's out of 19 vehicles. The rest of the vehicles are all trucks. And the town is considering replacing gas engines with electric engines in 2 or 3 of the medium or heavy duty trucks. And then we've named the fleet, or Public Works Department named the fleet after Sugarfoot, which is the name of our little deer logo. And then also Indiana Jones and Yoda, which are the statues that are in the public park that's adjacent to Town Hall. We also have 3 electric bicycles in our fleet. If we count those, that pushes us up to 27% electric vehicles in our town fleet. And then the town also recently installed a public electric bicycle charging station in a town park. And then the town does participate in MCE Deep Green Energy, along with all the other Marin County governments. And so our vehicles are powered by clean energy. The town installed some new chargers with a low impact development project that was in a parking lot near our town hall. And then we've also recently, within the past year, adopted rules for the public chargers, like free parking for electric vehicles, and then also fines for people that violate the electric vehicle rules, and also a policy to be revenue neutral with our chargers. In the past, we offered free charging, which when we had fewer charging stations, it cost us about $500 a month. And now we're just hoping to break even because with the addition of our new chargers, it was costing about $1,000 a month for the electricity. And we're not charging for any electrical permits associated with electric vehicle chargers in order to encourage their installation. And we adopted new green building requirements that also require panel upgrades for single family residences and EV readiness for multifamily and commercial projects. And I won't go into a lot of details on that, but I do have information on what we're requiring currently. So one of the big efforts that we can do without a lot of funds is to promote electric vehicles. And so we do use our town social media to promote electric vehicle trial events and preferred pricing programs. And we'll send out information on this Drive Clean Week and those events as soon as I get off of here. And then also our MCE does have promotions and does offer grants for lower income households, and we try to promote those as well. We hosted an electric bike trial on one of the days that our main street was closed, which I thought was a great event, and I encourage people to do that while our streets are closed for COVID-19. If you have an electric bicycle retailer around you. And then we also try to tell the staff about the discounts that are available through the state of California for government employees. There's a lot of discounts for electric vehicles. And we also try to emphasize that we want the source of the power for these electric vehicles to be renewable clean energy. And so we do continually promote MCE Deep Green to our residents, because that really is the ideal solution, is to have an electric vehicle, but also have the source of the energy be clean. One of the reasons that we were successful, I think, is that we had a lot of buy-in from all of our departments. We didn't have resistance or any sort of, everyone was very supportive of moving forward with an electric vehicle strategy and finding ways to make it work. We also had the participation of our Sustainability Commission, who are really, really active in our town, and then also the Planning Commission. And then our Sustainability Commission members had reached out to town council members before the hearing to solicit their feedback on the plan, which I thought was useful. And then they also did assure the town council that we were just approving general plans and goals, but there wasn't any specific, well, there was a little bit of a commitment for funding, but there was an assurance that we're not committing them to any sort of cost right now, that it's something that we could work into future budgets and considering staff time to implement the policy. And then the Sustainability Commission also got a really supportive crowd at the council meeting by contacting the local electric vehicle groups. And then the obstacles that we've seen is, like even just for this report, trying to get data on vehicles is not easy. So now they're available through the Department of Vehicles site, but you have to do it by zip code search, so it's hard to compare without a lot of tedious work. It was difficult when we were doing our plan to determine how many chargers we may need. We know that there's a lot of demand for people to have them at their own homes, but it's hard to predict how many we'll need for the future. We did consider a couple different data sources to come up with our final number of, I think it's 167 chargers, and those would be dispersed throughout the town. But really the cost is so prohibitive. So even if there's grants available through our local transportation agency, for example, for a charging head, the cost of the infrastructure to install that vehicle charger is still pretty significant. So, and our budgets are so tight, especially this year. So that's been a real obstacle, just getting the funding. There's a lot of desire, we have locations, but we just need the funds. And then there we also still do have a lot of demand for, and not right now during COVID, but just to use the standard parking spaces that people do see the EV spaces sitting vacant in our downtown area, and there is we do still hear comments that people want to use those spaces for parking. And then even though we've adopted new green building standards, there just isn't very much new development in the town of San Anselmo. So I don't, we'll see new chargers coming in gradually as properties develop, but really the majority of the projects we see are residential remodels. So there are some requirements for those in our new green building standards, but it's, I guess it is an obstacle that the more new development we have, the more new electric vehicle charging stations we would see, and really we would love to see more of them at the multifamily sites where there still is some affordable housing too, in order to give more options to all of our residents in town. And that concludes my presentation.
Okay, thank you, Elise. Our final panelist will be from Oakland. This is Michael Randolph. He's a transportation planner for the city of Oakland. He's overseeing Oakland's first zero-emission vehicle action plan. Michael.
Hi, nice to meet everyone. My name is Michael Randolph. I'm a transportation planner at the city of Oakland. So I'm going to share my screen here. All right, so I want to thank the other panelists. Thank you so much. As I said, I'm also the first transportation planner at the city of Oakland to kind of focus specifically on electrification. I'm very new. I started about 2 months ago, so everything is still very much a work in progress. And unlike the other panelists, the city we don't have a finished EV roadmap or a zero emission vehicle action plan. We're at the very beginning of basically a 2-year process. Okay, so for those that might not know too much about Oakland, this is a beautiful view of downtown Oakland. We are a mid-sized city of about 425,000 people on 56 square miles. Population density ranges from quite dense in our downtown core to rather suburban in the hills and outer neighborhoods. Oakland also has the good fortune of being one of the most racially and ethnically diverse cities in America by virtue of almost equal proportions white, Black, Hispanic, and Asian populations. And about 2 years ago, Oakland created the Department of Transportation, with most of our staff coming from our Public Works Department. And the Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan that we're working on and discussing today is a joint effort of the Environmental Services Division in Public Works and the Parking and Mobility team in the Oakland Department of Transportation, where I sit. I want to look first at the historical context of the city of Oakland, because this guides our work in many ways. Like almost every city in America, Oakland was redlined from the 1930s up until the Fair Housing Act was passed in 1968, denying loans and investment in minority neighborhoods across the city of Oakland. As you can see from this map, the areas that are currently the most disadvantaged due to income, race, language, single-parent households, disability, and other social economic factors overlap greatly with the areas that were redlined in the past. So how does this relate to electric mobility? We often see the echoes of these discriminatory policies show up in many ways, including in the ways that electric vehicle infrastructure is located throughout the city. So just two quick maps I was able to grab. On the left is just where public EV chargers can be found today in the city of Oakland. On the right is basically the number of owned zero emission vehicles by zip code. That's what's available by the CEC. And as you can see on the left, public chargers are available in downtown Oakland, but you don't see it all in West Oakland or East Oakland, which kind of matches up with the red line maps. And then as far as who owns ZEVs in Oakland, you have like up to 2,000 vehicles in North Oakland and the hills, and not so much in the flatlands of Oakland. So moving on to our plan, Zero Emission Vehicle Action Plan, this comes from and is guided by Oakland's recently passed 2030 Equitable Climate Action Plan, or ECAP for short. And this is the city's bold response to climate change. It was adopted by City Council in July, in addition to committing the city of Oakland to achieving carbon neutrality by 2045. To create this plan, city staff worked with an equity facilitator team co-led by local racial and environmental justice organizations. And this undertook a 1.5-year long community engagement process. And basically one of the actions in this plan is to create a specific ZEV action plan as one of its defined actions. Moving on to an equity focus, along with the ECAP, a racial equity impact assessment and implementation guide was created. And this provides us with a comprehensive set of recommendations and best practices to help city staff maximize equity for all of the actions and strategies that were created in the ECAP. What this looks like in practice is, in particular with electric mobility, is we want to weigh infrastructure that's put in disadvantaged communities and outside of disadvantaged communities and make sure there isn't a disparity. And if there is a disparity, we want to actually go forward and deal with it. So this includes working with community-based organizations on the ground. The city recently, we released a request for proposals for outreach, and we really want to partner with community-based organizations to demystify electric vehicles and educate residents about access to incentives, really reducing those barriers to electrification. So right now it's still in flux as we're still in development, but we've kind of congealed around these possible plan topic areas that we want to dive into in the plan with different chapters, and each of these would have specific strategies and actions attached to them. So this is existing buildings. So what building codes or incentives could we be put in place to encourage the retrofitting of EV infrastructure in existing buildings? A lot of Oakland's housing stock is very, very old and not exactly ready for EVs at all. Multi-unit dwellings, there's a mismatch between available public charging and those that live in apartments, and we want to figure out how to address those barriers, and especially looking at opportunities in affordable housing developments. Curbside charging. The curb has many competing uses, and curbside charging in particular is incredibly complex and involves many stakeholders inside and outside the city. And so we want to be able to address those barriers and really figure out solutions to increase public charging, particularly, as I mentioned, with multi-unit dwellings, is we want to focus on increasing the amount of public charging, and the curb space is one of those places we can do that. medium and heavy duty fleets, what the city can do to foster electrification there. And also electric micromobility. I think there's an understanding that the most efficient way to reduce emissions is to not drive at all, but for those trips that aren't possible with active transportation, we would like to electrify them with an automobile. But this plan also, we want to look at increasing the access to e-bikes and e-scooters, whether they are owned or shared. We also want to look at developing a zero-emission vehicle economy and workforce. We want to establish a ZEV job pipeline. And so we want to understand the barriers that are faced by employers and job seekers in this industry and to come up with solutions. And so this could possibly lead to public-private partnerships. And then finally, we want to look at city leadership. And this is particularly focused on what assets the city owns. And this can include parking lots, garages, and other facilities that can be leveraged to increase electrification infrastructure. So looking forward, we are in very, very early development. As I said, this is going to be a 2-year process. And of course, there have been many delays due to the pandemic. But as I said, we released our RFP for outreach. And as soon as we have our community-based partners onboarded, we'll be beginning our public outreach process in earnest. So this will include community workshops, as well as stakeholder advisory groups on many of those different topics I've talked about. So some of the desired outcomes we can see moving forward is that we basically want to create the plan that the ECAP expects of us. It needs to be equitable, and we want to be able to reverse the disparities we see with electric vehicle ownership and electric vehicle charging infrastructure that exists in the city right now. This could also include possible changes to municipal code or ordinances that we can recommend for the permitting of EV infrastructure. And also with the completion of this plan, this will set up the city well for future funding and opportunities to receive grants to achieve the actions that are in the plan. So if you would like to learn more, we do have a topic area on the Oakland website, but one of my goals is to basically improve it because it's pretty bare right now. But also if you're interested at all, have any questions or want to be involved, feel free to email me, or you can also follow OakDot on Twitter to stay informed. And that is the end of my slideshow. Thank you very much. This was the first presentation I have ever given on Zoom, and I have ever given as a planner at the City of Oakland, and have probably given it a very while, so a little nervous, but thank you so much for having me.
Michael, thank you so much. I know this was like baptism by fire. It only come on 2 months ago, and we said, hey, wouldn't you like to give a little talk? Let me remind everyone, we have the panelists talk to each other a bit about what they saw in each other's plans, what the differences are, what the similarities are, what the obstacles are. We are going to go to breakouts after the panelists talk and after we have some Q&A. So with that, I would ask my panelists to talk with each other about what you saw in each other's plans. If there were great ideas that your city didn't think of that you saw from somebody else's.
I think the one thing that really jumped out at me was Berkeley's Curbside program for charging, because that is really a way that we could get chargers in places all over our town. I just would be really excited about getting something like that started here. Do you see much demand for that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that those who utilize it are very excited about it. It's gone well in that regard, but in terms of sheer numbers, it's relatively small. And just to clarify, this is a pilot program that we've had in place now, I think about 6 years, that allows residents, property owners who lack off-street parking to, through this pilot, get permission either to create a new space on their private property. So typically that would be a new curb cut and something that looks like a driveway in their front yard. Or if there's no physical space for that, it would allow them to install a charging station at the curb in front of their homes so that it can be used while they're parked on the street. It is still a very expensive undertaking for the applicant. So it really does serve just a small percentage of our population, right? It's those who own their homes, who lack off-street parking, and who have enough enough disposable income to put several $1,000s, 10,000 in some cases. Some people's estimates have been 20,000. They usually don't go through with it, to install a curbside charging station. So our electric mobility roadmap in part was, you know, we still have that program. We've got a whole variety of things, but it was also recognition we need to think more broadly about what can serve our population and bring those benefits to everyone in our community.
I guess I saw it as an opportunity potentially to have, and maybe it's a publicly installed, again, if you find the funds, chargers in locations that aren't a parking lot, or someplace like in residential neighborhoods where there may be lots of street parking, but just no parking lot or nearby commercial area, or, you know, it could see it as an opportunity for just more neighborhood charging stations.
And I think we would love to see it that way too. And that has just proved to be really difficult, right?
That's
because you still got to have, in most cases, a building that is the source of power, right? I think, you know, obviously, I know Oakland's had experience with putting in curbside charging, the complexities of providing for ADA access. In Sacramento, some of those preserving trees became a very big, important issue, and we've had that actually here as well. I don't know, Lowell, if you want to chime in. I know that San Francisco, I think, has been particularly thoughtful about all the different constraints and sort of pressures and uses of curb space, right? It is a sort of precious, limited commodity.
Yeah, Sarah, you're absolutely right. Kind of very much to Michael's point about the competing uses for the curb. It's very valuable, and in San Francisco, I think the thoughtfulness behind it is, you know, we want to ensure that it's an equitable use of that precious resource. You know, the analogy is like, you know, we want that curbside charging to be like a water fountain where everyone can be able to draw from it when they're thirsty. So, you know, we're working with the SFMTA, which is the San Francisco Municipal Transportation Authority, which is charged with overseeing curb spaces. And, you know, together, along with other agencies, we are attempting to develop some parameters around curb charging for eventually a pilot. Is very much still in development phase, but you know, we understand that curbside charging has a place in the EV roadmap. Just figuring out how to deploy that thoughtfully, equitably, and ensuring that, you know, no unintended consequences are caused as a result. So we're taking small steps.
I think it's great, at least, that you brought up the cost factor, right? Even with incentives and grants and other opportunities that are available, it is still very expensive to install charging stations and maintain and operate them. And I think that's magnified at curbside. Yeah, I think it is typically much less expensive if you're able to do it in an off-street lot. But some of our communities like Berkeley are very parking constrained, and there are great things about that, right? We love that so many people in our community walk and bike and use public transit, and that's really what we want to continue to promote. But, you know, with the governor's new executive order about phasing out and banning the sales of gasoline vehicles and other things that we've had within our own community too in that regard, we're also aware that we really need to increase the number of EV charging opportunities available.
I was going to ask you all a question. It looks like all of you have very aggressive targets for the percentages of EVs in your town. And of course, now with the governor's new mandate, it will be a help. But gosh, I was thinking to myself, how are we ever going to get there? What can cities do? Anyone have any thoughts on that?
I think it's interesting because since that the governor's announcement, our team at Oakland has been having conversations because we're like since we're at the very beginning, we're thinking about like, okay, how do we want to talk to possible as we put together stakeholder advisory groups, and we were particularly talking about what a stakeholder group for existing buildings and retrofitting would be, and like keeping in mind that people are going to be resistant to additional rules and regulations around building, but at the same time, that the fact that the governor has basically said that there won't be any gas cars after this point, that there's almost just like we have to prepare, like this is coming. It can almost it's not necessarily a stick, but I think it's a way we can approach communicating with different stakeholders just about what we need to do to prepare for this eventuality.
Yeah, I find that as much as we don't want to lose local control over things, generally when the state comes down with some type of rule, it's often very helpful, especially in the cases of energy efficiency and electric vehicles, because if we get enough demand too, hopefully the prices will drop. One question I have when we just considered our goals is, we don't know how often people's vehicles turn over. So if we were trying to set ambitious goals, but we don't even know if people are replacing their vehicles as much as we were anticipating they were going to do that. But with goals like the governor's, perhaps maybe there's more publicity around it and people are more motivated to consider a different vehicle when they go to buy, or maybe they're motivated to actually replace their vehicle when they might have kept it for longer. So, and I'm also hoping that the used car market will increase because they're still very expensive to buy, and any new car is, but so the more that we have of the used ones, there may be more opportunities for people that aren't go and buy a car or don't have the opportunity to get loans for expensive vehicles.
All right, should I go to our questions from our audience? This is directed towards Berkeley. It says, what is Berkeley doing to provide more public charging? This is a huge issue for people with older used EVs, and Berkeley has been a charging desert.
Well, apologies for that. Obviously, we did just put in a huge number of new charging ports in our Center Street garage. We have them in other municipal garages throughout the city. We do have one public curbside charging station in front of our West Branch Berkeley Library as well. We are working, I would say, primarily at this point with East Bay Community Energy, our CCA. They are working to obtain, or I think now have actually obtained, state funds to support charging stations installations that'll roll out next year in 2021. So we've definitely been working with them. I would say nearly all of the public charging stations that we have in place so far, we were able to do through a grant funded by the California Energy Commission. Similar to Elise, we do have a fee for charging, and the intent also is just to cover the costs. That includes the cost of the electricity, and also for these sort of what they're called smart charging stations, as in they're networked and provide information about availability that's available to drivers, and provide information about how much electricity is dispensed and the like. They have annual fees associated. So that's another fee. And then of course, maintenance is also, I would say it's relatively minimal, but it does occur, right? We've had both our charging station out at the marina, as well as in front of our West Branch Berkeley Library, have been, had some vandalism over the years. And I think that is pretty typical for public charging stations. So that's another factor that goes into it as well. So we are working on it. It takes money. takes staff time, and it takes partnerships.
Okay, thank you. This is a question for San Francisco. It says, how can a single local jurisdiction in California actually get to 100% EVs? Legal authority seems pretty limited, even when it comes to halting internal combustion engine vehicle sales.
That is a great point and question. And to that end, when we developed that goal, we had the entire Bay Area region in mind, and the question is absolutely right. We don't have that kind of authority, and we certainly don't know how we're going to actually get there, but we would rely on the regional efforts such as the EV Coordinating Council that the Air District has formed, and in our blueprint, which is the implementation plan for the roadmap, we have intentions to work with other jurisdictions and other CCAs and coordinate with them to ensure that their plans are also aligned as much as possible with ours, and that a forum like this is also a great way for us to connect and align our goals so that so San Francisco can get to that 2040 all electric vision by 2040.
Right. It takes a village, it takes more than the village, it takes the whole country, it takes the whole world.
Right.
Another question for Berkeley. Is there a timeline? I expect this is in respect to getting EVs on the road. What are the priorities? What will happen in the next year or two?
So our roadmap does lay out a timeline for each of our strategies and actions. There are some information about sort of time frame as well as probable cost and potential resources. So that's included in our roadmap. Overall, the intention with these actions are in the next sort of 5 to 10 year time frame. This, of course, is an area where there is a lot of change very rapidly, right? Technological changes in terms of the vehicles, the offerings, the charging technology. So lots is hard to predict, and so we're trying to go on a relatively short time span.
Okay. All right, this is a question for all of you. It says, as EV penetration increases, vehicle to home and vehicle to grid energy flows have huge potential. How do you see that progressing? So being able to use your car, essentially the battery in your car, as backup to your home when the power goes out, or providing grid services.
Mm-hmm.
I know that we've heard from some of our residents that are already doing that now, and they do see it as a really big benefit. And in fact, buying like a used EV might be less expensive than certain generators or other power sources. So it could be economical for certain people too. I see it as extremely promising. But again, the technology I think is still catching up with that idea.
Yeah. I think it's really.
Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, I think it's really exciting from a resiliency perspective as well. I think heard some conversations about how they could possibly be a part of a resiliency hub, a community resiliency hub. So not necessarily, so even beyond just a single family that has EV, but maybe a community faith-based organization, they can have this to help their resiliency in any type of natural disaster type of situation.
I also agree, super exciting. I think it will be super important. There's some work going on at the Lawrence Berkeley National Lab, also somewhat at UC Berkeley, definitely some state work groups and what on this as well. So I think we've got good things to come in that regard.
And I think this goes to Mark Jacobson's discussion that we'll actually save some energy, even though we're going to all electric appliances everywhere. Because if we can push the energy back onto the grid when it's needed, this is storage for the whole grid. but I'll take a few more questions. This one is for Oakland. Michael, e-bikes have huge potential in Oakland and require almost no charging infrastructure. Does promoting them seem like it's going to be a priority?
I think it definitely it can be. Like I said, we're still at the beginning of this process, but I remember when I first started and we were having conversations about what we would like to possibly see in this plan, and as time has gone on and we've had more conversations, electric micromobility has become a bigger part of something we want to look at and we want to explore. I think we're looking at possible grant opportunities to possibly go for e-bike lending libraries throughout the city. I think there's a lot of, I am definitely really excited about the potential for e-bikes and what they can possibly bring to delivery, just increasing the access to them, I think is really important. So I am personally really excited to, during the next 2 years of developing this plan, to really dive into how we can increase access to e-bikes. So I totally agree, they can definitely be a priority. And I'm definitely excited to see where this process leads us to increase access.
Yeah.
If there is time, I would love to hear more from Elise about I believe you referenced a new public bike charging station in a park. So either now or...
It's a fast answer, it's just an outlet that they installed.
Okay.
But it's by a bike rack, and it was intentionally installed just for that, to provide opportunities to charge up.
All right, and this one is San Anselmo, I think, said that no permit fees for EV charging stations at a home. Berkeley, are you thinking of this stuff?
I'm so glad that got asked, because I actually also wanted to ask the same. We have done a lot of work to streamline and to minimize fees, but we've been told we can't remove fees completely. That those are just the fees that cover the staff review time. At times, like for our curbside charging pilot, we were able to use grant funds to cover the permit fees, but I would love to hear, Elise, how you were able to remove the fees completely.
And our council's been very supportive. So they've waived fees for certain affordable housing units, for solar projects, for a number of things that really, to try to encourage things that they want to see happen that are good for our community and good for the planet.
Okay, I think we've got to the end of our time for question and answer in this format. The people who did not get their questions answered here, we will be going into breakouts and we'll have more of a general discussion there as well. So you'll be able to ask questions. It looks like we got most of our participants back. Jack, in your group, did you have a scribe? Do you have someone who wrote?
I took some notes. I don't know if anybody else did or not. Michael and Suzanne were our two resource experts. I don't know if one of you wants to try to sum up what we talked about.
We talked about the difficulty of installing charging, especially DC fast chargers, and how complex it is. And I think both cities all of us at the city level are really working hard about that. We talked a little bit about delivery robots and electric mobility, personal mobility like e-bikes, congestion management zones, and how those can be allowing EV access if those zones are adopted in cities. We were asked how citizens can help us in our work, and that was sort of toward the end. I think we both agreed that please contact your local city council person or your local representative, because they often don't know about the need, and we as practitioners can talk, but you know, we're biased. So that's one thing you can do. And I would ask also Michael and Sarah and Elise if you have other suggestions on that one, because I think that's important to all of us.
Okay, so we did have a scribe, that's Marion. Do you want to give a little report, Marion?
Yes, so the discussion mainly centered on e-bikes and how they're considered sort of in between electric vehicles and bicycles, and how there's a question whether they can be included into like bike lanes, etc., with the safety issues. but basically, and they're and also bike sharing programs and whether they're getting off the ground. I guess there weren't any conclusions about this, or a lot of there is a question about e-bikes, but on the other end, maybe e-bikes, and there are also different levels of e-bikes. And there are initiatives in the cities, San Anselmo, Berkeley, to try and get bike share programs started. So that's pretty much.
But thanks everybody. I really enjoyed it, and I just wish we had more time. But I'm really looking forward, Michael, to working with you in Oakland and all of the people here on this call that are in Oakland. I really like that advice about making sure our council members know that this is important. And we have a huge challenge to replace all these. Just in Oakland, we have 225,000 gas cars. That is a huge job to get rid of them all. And so, hey, all of the steps that were talked about are important, and it's going to take all of us working together and getting the political will.
Yeah, I agree with you, Jack. I just thought, gosh, we've got a lot of work in front of us. There's issues about charging. There's getting people's attention, and now maybe with the governor's executive order that will get people's attention. But, you know, thinking that each one of us who owns a car, who does not yet own an EV, is going to have to go there. And that just seems overwhelming. And we're going to have the infrastructure and the grid of, you know, and you kind of get like, oh my God. But if we don't talk about it and start planning for it, we'll never get there. So I think these kind of things, these kind of discussions are great. I wish we had had more time.
Yeah, so anyway, we should go back to the main room now. And I see that Beth put the link into the chat to just get back to the main room. So thank you everybody, to the speakers in particular, but all the participants as well. Really, really appreciate all your work to be here and to keep at it. Let's make it happen.